public space in the post-urban world. I mean, how can one even come to think of discussing these three concepts at the same time? Well, I couldn't, but Karima could. You gave me this title. Anyhow, I've been reflecting on them, and it's been quite interesting, I would say. And I've tried to then raise some research questions. The first and the most important one, I think, is then, of course, that does public space influence social capital? And then, if it does, how? Then I also started with the question that what is the relative importance of public space in that case compared with other factors that influence social capital? And also, if there is any reason to believe that the relationship between public space and social capital varies, is different in the post-urban world compared with the traditional city and the traditional world. And in order to try to answer these questions, I have, of course, to go into some definitions and so on. But first, well, this is one way of expressing my method. A simpler way of describing what I've been doing is that I've been thinking and discussing with myself. I started by trying to find some earlier research, but I got very disappointed, in fact. I found some papers of very low quality, published in fake journals or very poorly edited books. I found a kind of debate article or chapter by Ashermin that was, in fact, interesting. But then there are also some articles then in the placemaking and design literature that sort of touches upon these issues, but not very much. So in the main, I would say that the previous so-called research, it stacks claim on top of each other with, in principle, no empirical evidence at all. So let's start from the scratch. But first, a message from Tigran: buy our book. Okay, what is this post-urban world then? Well, this is then expressed by the great Kobayashi at the Kyoto University. He's talking about re-urbanization, that is not people moving from rural areas to cities, but mainly moving from smaller agglomerations to bigger agglomerations. It's a densification of city regions going on, but it also, outside this densification, a regional enlargement going on by improved public transportations, roads and so on. Upgrading of intercity communications, and dissolution of two conventional frames of reference on urban development. On the one hand, the urban-rural dichotomy and the urban-suburban dichotomy. And this Kobayashi expressed then in spatial terms. The social terms that we have been discussing here, we could say that the post-urban world is also reflected in increasing gaps within city regions. Because what the post-urban world is saying also is that cities, okay, that's interesting, but what is really important is the city regions. City regions with a mosaic of land use and activities, even rural areas. So we don't need to discuss whether Professor Edward Glaser is living in a rural area or in an urban area. He lives in a city region. That's what matters. Then does this post-urban world mean anything new for social capital and public space? Well, Ashermin had a longer historical perspective, but he says that we are very far from the times where a city's central public space were the leading cultural and political site. The sites of civic and political formation are much more plural and distributed today. And to this, we can, of course, add that the knowledge economy, the knowledge society, cyberspace, and so on, has also meant other ways for human interaction. So, the social capitals of distance-independent networks have increased at the expense of local social capital, maybe, but at least we know that they have increased. But on the other hand, this densification of parts of the city regions might mean denser local social capital, or it might mean also, what is it? I should press there, that one. Yeah, densification might also mean less public space if more is built. And then we have this thing that I sort of came to think of, the visitors versus the locals. Increasingly, cities, inner cities, city regions are attracting visitors. And there's some kind of course, competition for space. And yeah, some very popular tourist places in Europe are invaded by visitors. Venice, I think, was mentioned here before. The same is with Mallorca, the Spanish island, but also other tourist sites in Spain. So, this is something also we need to consider when it comes to social capital. Whose social capital? And what connections do visitors versus local have with each other or with the city? Okay, but let's go to the basics very short about social capital. What is it? Well, it's mainly defined as social networks consisting of nodes and links, and most often the nodes are individuals or organizations. And then it's also often defined as the norms and values being distributed within these links between the nodes. Putnam talked in principle only about the social capital of the civil society. I and others have also stressed that there is, of course, social capital. There is, of course, nodes and links, or networks, social networks in other parts of society, other sectors, that business and government and subsectors and so on. Okay, if we now have the hypothesis that public space have an impact on social capital, we want to have as good public space as possible, but why do we want to influence social capital? Well, there is research that has shown that certain forms of social capital have a positive impact on a number of factors like entrepreneurship, innovation, growth, well-being, but also social cohesion. But there is also research showing that other forms of social capital have negative impact. In particular, when we have groups close to each other, but with a very strong bonding, internal social capital that come in conflict with each other, then these social capitals can be really disastrous for the local place or region or nation. All right, we have a number of factors that theoretically are influencing social capital. We have individual characteristics, we have characteristics of organizations, we have public policy. Of course, public policy is very much about changing people's attitude and behavior. And we have institutions. And we have some spatial conditions. For example, density, distance, and access to or the form of public space. So public space is one of the factors that could have an impact on social capital. Which components of social capital are then most likely to be affected by public space? The norms and the values? Well, probably not, unless we count the kind of feelings, emotion, and attachment that individual can have for a local place, for a city or parts of a city. That's also some kind of social capital. the feelings for a place. But mainly, I would say that it is the networks, spatial conditions, among them, then the public space, should have an impact on nodes' potentials to build and maintain links between each other, either positive or negative effects. So the fact that there is public space means a potential, that there are potential meeting places and places for activities that build and maintain social capital. But what kind of activities? Mainly, I would say it's leisure activities and civil or civic activities. That is what people do in their leisure time. And a pure economist would say that, well, this is consumption. This is consumption time. What about the role then for social capital for production instead, for entrepreneurship, innovation, and growth? Well, that's a question I come back to. And then, is the public space mainly important for inhabitants' social capital or for visitors? Because this distinction should matter. If it's only about visitors and their feelings for nice cities, nice surroundings, okay, it's important for the tourism industry, but not so much more. On the other hand, if it's for the inhabitants, then it's more of a fixed asset. That social capital could have an impact for the long-term development of the city. So the form of public space can either be a facilitator or an obstacle to the activities that have a potential to contribute to the emergence and maintenance of social links. And the form of public space can also contribute to determining the attractiveness of a particular public space, and thereby the number of potential nodes that will spend their time there. Having gone so far, I think we should look at this picture. Originally, I wanted to have this as just an example of very bad public space. This is in the very center of Stockholm, right south of the central railway station. This is, in fact, the sign says that the railroad park, very much of a park, I would say. However, this is very central. I mean, just around the corner is the Sheraton Hotel, and another block away is the national government's offices. And over down here is the old town. So very many people pass this park, thousands of people each day on their way back and forth from the central station. But we can understand why people really don't want to be there, even though it's a sunny day and seems to be spring also, looking at the trees. But there is a man sitting there. If we would enlarge the picture, we would see that he's not so well dressed. We can also see that he has a plastic bag there between his feet. I bet it contains beer, wine, or booze, or a combination of them. Because it's the only people using this public space are alcoholics. All other people just pass by, going somewhere else. But this is a place for them, and since no one else really claims the right to be there, there are no real protests to the police, you must come and get these guys away. So they are sort of accepted being there. So the funny thing here is that we have now a public place that doesn't seem to be very attractive. It doesn't build any social capital for people since they are not there in general. But for this guy and his mates, this is the place where they are allowed to build and form their social capital. Maybe a social capital not very useful for economic performance or for the cohesion of society, but for their group, it's their public space. Yeah, this is then less than 500 meters away in Stockholm. It's the King's Garden. It's also spring. We can see the cherry blossoms here in the trees, and everything looks really wonderful. Here, there must be lots of social capital. Well, there are lots of people, anyhow, that we can see. But do we really know if they form any new social capital? We don't know. Maybe they are just there with their friends that they already know, and in that case, they are maintaining the existing social capital. But if there are any activities here that really creates new social capital, that we don't know. But on the other hand, we can say that just outside here, along this side of the park, there are lots of cafes and so on where people can sit and drink and socialize, and they do it also here. So here we have at least a higher potential for social capital. And this, as you also can see, this space is much more diverse when it comes to the amenities there. But the question is then, is public space only a potential for social capital building and maintenance? I would say so. Because, yeah, places that attract more people, they have a higher potential to promote creation of social capital. So if we just would like then to measure the potential for public spaces to form social capital, then I think we have an easy function here. The number of people at a place times the time they stay at the place. There we can sort of calculate the potential for social capital. But what is then important is, well, how attractive is the place? How long do they want to play there? And what do they do there? Do they form any new social capital, or are they just, say, enjoying life? I mean, those people at the King's Garden, they were enjoying life. Sunny day, a fountain there, the cherry blossoms and so on. So from that perspective, it's individuals' characteristics that determine whether they take part in activities in public space or not. And it is the form of the public space that determines whether they want to go there. So the final question, I think this is, what type of social capital can public space then contribute to? These are just some kind of questions or hypotheses, but I would say in city centers, it might be mainly feelings of well-being when the sun is shining and so on. So then it's nice to be at these places. It also can be very much that it's network among friends that meet there. However, in neighborhoods of residential areas, the networks of neighbors that meet there at public space, there might be more of a creation place for a sense of belonging in the neighborhoods. So there, I think at least we should recognize that there could be a difference between city centers, where people normally don't know each other, and neighborhoods, where there is a higher potential for strengthening the connections and links between neighbors. But can public space in any way contribute to social capital that promote entrepreneurship, innovation, and growth? As far as I have been thinking so far, I cannot find any argument for that. So, some tentative conclusions here. It is possible that the post-urban world with cyberspace and so on means less important for public space, at least in the sense that people are using other tools, other arenas for human interaction than just public space. Public space is also just , just, , 1 just, 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 1 Third, there might be a difference between the role of public space in centers, city centers, and in residential areas. And finally, it can be questioned whether public space creates any social capital that promotes economic growth, at least directly. These are very, very tentative conclusions, of course, just based on this thinking and discussing with myself. But the only really clear conclusion that I could draw so far is that if we want to know something more about these issues, about social capital, public space in the post-open world, then we need some more research. Thank you.
Great conclusion. Thank you, Hans. We have time for one question, and then we've got a jam up for the next hour. Please go ahead, Peter.
Not a question, I can give a comment. If you have public space with regulars, so people who live there and spend time there regularly, and you also have small firms presence, I would say you can actually have very creative public spaces, like Union Square in Manhattan, or Nytorget in Stockholm, which is the equivalent. I think you can see very strong social networks there under those circumstances. Many main streets are very productive. Many big chains actually starts at main streets because they are so broad and so mixed, and usually main streets have a lot of small firms. So I would say small firms at street level have a quality that goes far beyond what they have in turnover, because they function as spiders in social networks.
Hey, Peter. Okay,
Yep.
Yeah.
Good comments. I'm happy to add regulars there to the neighborhoods.
Yeah. I mean, this is the question. We really enjoyed your taking this on, but here's where we get into interdisciplinary problems, because by your doing a search for social capital and public space, you came up with very little, in which there's an enormous literature on the generative parts of public space, including economic growth, including entrepreneurship, including informal relations, including the regulars, including people helping each other, from health care to every kind of care possible. So here we have a problem, it seems to me, of trying to use only the term social capital than to think about all the pieces that make up social capital, whether you use Putnam or anyone else, because really public space definitely creates social capital, and there's a very large literature that substantiates that, particularly in poor neighborhoods.